This conversation with Bex around understanding and knowing your inner critic and moving towards your inner coach is such a powerful conversation for anyone who gets stuck in self-doubt spirals, procrastinates a lot, feels overwhelmed, doesn't go after what they want, and stops them from being the best version of themselves at work and in home, is going to get so much from this episode. Dr. Bex Bell is a speaker, coach, and author. Applying her background in forensic psychology, health promotion, and fitness, she helps people do great things by fueling themselves with self-awareness, self-compassion, and self-worth. So let's jump on in and let's chat to Bex. Oh, Bex, I'm really excited to have this conversation talking about how we shift from our inner critic to our inner coach and really talking about the amazing work that you do in this space. But before we jump in, what led you to doing this work? Like, why jumping into the world of mindset and especially around our inner talk and that being around that critical space and wanting to reshape that?
Yes, it's such a cool question and a very windy journey to get there. It never pans out quite like you think. But I guess if I reflect back, as far back as I can remember, I have been fascinated by brains, by the human mind, and just by people and what makes them tick. And so that curiosity led me to do psychology at uni, and specifically criminal psychology, because I got really fascinated in, I guess you'd call it the darker side of the human mind and what pushes us to do darker things. As part of all that work, I spent a lot of time doing research in prisons. I sat across the table from many high-risk offenders who had often been in prison for most of their lives, and were typically violent, done some pretty horrific things. As you can maybe imagine, a lot of them just did not like themselves very much. And I could see it on their face, hear it in what they said. And it really got me fascinated about the relationship that we have with ourselves and how toxic it can be if we don't like ourselves very much, if we don't trust ourselves, if we don't back ourselves, if we don't believe that we can make a change in our life. In a very different context to the personal development world, that's what got me interested in the relationship we have with ourselves and how we talk to ourselves. But also running alongside that, I was, as part of that research, doing postgraduate study. And so I was immersed in the academic world. And that was one where I never felt like I belonged at all. So I had raging imposter syndrome the whole time I was at uni. And it was really uncomfortable, it really unhelpful, and it caused me a lot of stress. It meant that finishing my PhD took about 3 times as long as it should because I was just so stuck often in paralysis by analysis and procrastination because I didn't believe that I had what it took to be an academic. And so alongside the prison stuff and thinking about our relationship with ourselves, I got thinking about my relationship with myself and why is it that I feel like such an imposter? No matter what my grades are, no matter what good feedback I get, I just feel like I don't belong here. And that fooling everybody into thinking I'm more competent than I actually am. And so that was really significant to me. And I actually just transitioned into speaking about the imposter syndrome to audiences that sort of indicated they were interested about it. And it was through those travels of starting to speak to people that I was like, oh my God, I am not the only one that feels like this. Like, this is a big issue and it's holding people back. And it is my duty to use my research skills of what I know about psychology to help people with this stuff. Whether you're an offender in prison that doesn't like themselves very much or a corporate leader trying your best to be your best leader, but not really believing that you're any good. So that is the long answer of how I ended up here.
Wow. And that relationship with self that's where it all stems from. And that's a whole conversation in itself around our upbringing and what shapes that mindset and then what shapes that relationship with ourselves. But it is one of the biggest blockers to people being really exceptional leaders is what they believe about themselves, what they feel about themselves, think about themselves. And that does have that flow-on effect in terms of how I behave, how I act, how I don't behave, how I don't act, those things. So it's amazing. Those are 2 huge extremes, right? Like working with criminals and researching them in that really extreme environment and then looking at those who are in the corporate space. But fundamentally, we're still a person experiencing those things. It's just what those thoughts and those feelings then led to, like where that takes us.
Yes.
Wow, so powerful. So let's start talking about that inner critic. Let's start talking about that relationship with self. What impact does our inner critic have on us, on our work, on our relationships, on our lives? Why is it important that we know more about it and understand it and potentially do some work on it?
Yeah, I think it's important because it has the potential to impact literally everything and not in a very awesome way. It can have some negative impacts. And I guess because the inner critic, that voice of not good enough, should be doing more, should be better. So it or didn't do it perfectly, so I'm failing. It is essentially like a lens. That's is true of any mindset. It's like a lens that we interpret ourselves through, we look at the world through it, we look at other people through it, and we interpret what our potential is through that lens. We interpret our challenges through that lens. So it has the capacity to just affect everything. So, in terms of how it can affect us, what I often see is a lot of stress and anxiety in people because it feels like when your inner critic's allowed, it literally feels like life and our career is just one big test that any second we're going to fail or somebody is going to catch us out failing at something. So, obviously, that doesn't put us in a very calm state. We're in a constant fight, flight, freeze type stress response because we're trying to prove ourselves all the time. So lots of stress, lots of anxiety. At work, it can look like a lot of procrastination because which often goes, yeah, my hand goes up with all of these too. But procrastination often goes very hand in hand with perfectionism because we are holding ourselves accountable to such unrealistically high standards. The pressure that we put on ourselves to get everything right and figure it out quickly and effortlessly feels so overwhelming that we just don't start things. And then we put it off until the very last minute. Then we have to do the mad scramble to make the deadline, and we're horrendously stressed in the process. It can also look like over preparing. So we're so scared of being caught out not knowing something that we try and dot every I, cross every T. It can look like holding back. So flying under the radar. So because we don't believe that we deserve to be there, or we might not believe we deserve our title. Even if we want to grow our career, we might not put our hand up for stretch opportunities because we think, oh, who am I to do that? And at the end of the day, ultimately, it can really impact our relationships. So not just with ourselves, but if we're busy overworking, over preparing, trying to do everything perfectly, what's happening to our relationships at home? We're not going to be probably our most favorite present, calm self. So it really does. The ripple effect is massive if it goes unchecked. So that's one of the key things I would say is that the inner critic is not a problem per se. It is only a problem when it's doing its best work outside of our awareness and we're not catching it in the action and choosing how to respond to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And also just talking about that relationship piece, like if we're constantly doubting ourselves, that can also lead us to seek that validation, that
Yes.
recognition. And so if we're consistently like, I'm not good enough at this, and I'm going to fail at this, and they're going to reject me, and that's the ever present conversation we're having with our friends, our partners, our families, there's going to come a point where they're like, it's draining, right? Listening to that
Mm,
consistently. So that can also be a tension in the relationship when we're constantly seeking that fullness from other people rather than, okay, how do we build that ourselves? And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit. But
mm,
yeah, that piece can also be, and I'm saying that from personal experience, because that was definitely my experience, just that consistent self doubt. I was never going to reach the expectations I'd set for myself. And it caused a lot of tension in my relationships because I was constantly seeking that from them to validate that. And that wasn't their job. It wasn't their job to
yes.
consistently validate that.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's also quite a dodgy thing to rely on because even if we put it in a work context, if we are looking for constant external validation from the people around us that we're doing okay, like maybe managers higher up than us and so on, what does it mean if we don't get that validation? What if people just forget to tell us that we're awesome? And so we don't get it. And then what does that mean about our worth? So you're so right that it's crucial to learn because it is a learned thing to learn how to build that validation for ourselves and to stop spending so much energy looking for it outward because we may never get what we're looking for. So we just go around in circles and don't feel very great on the way around the circles.
It's also unreliable. Like
Yes.
you can't rely on the consistency of that because you just can't, whereas you're only consistent. I should have actually asked this question before I asked the previous question, but what is the inner critic and what is the inner coach? What are your definitions of that before we jump into how we can start to shift from those two? So you talked about how our inner critic the impact it can have on us, but what is that definition? Like when you say inner critic, what are you talking about? And when we start talking about inner coach, what are you talking about?
Yep. Cool. So I think of these two things as just two different parts of ourselves. So there's a particular sort of therapeutic approach that really resonated with me, which is, it's got a bit of a funny name, but it's called internal family systems therapy, with the idea being that all of us inside of us have different bits to our internal world, and they're called parts. And they're like a little family inside of us. When we say things like, oh, part of me really likes this, but part of me doesn't. Or part of me feels anxious, but part of me feels excited too. It's natural for us to do this, to think of ourselves in parts. But it really made sense to me that part of us is self-critical, but then we also have other parts that are a little more supportive and encouraging. The inner critic, I would just say, is the part of you, that internal voice that is more critical. It will say negative things, not good enough, should have done it better, should be working harder, always falling short, not doing as well as other people. But the really interesting thing about the inner critic, and also I think a crucial thing for everybody to know, is that although it sounds like this negative enemy in our mind, it actually has really good intentions. It's actually a protective mechanism that develops to try and keep us away from emotional pain, i.e., the pain of rejection from other people, the pain of not belonging because we're not as good as other people, the pain of not being accepted by other people. So these are fundamental human needs that we have that when they're thwarted or compromised, literally feel like we're going to die. Everything in our mind and our whole nervous system is oriented towards survival and trying to keep us physically safe, but also emotionally safe. So when we're growing up, as soon as we start having experiences that hurt, this little inner critic part of us starts to develop and it starts getting louder and louder. Oh, when you did that thing or said that thing, somebody got angry with you and rejected you. Don't do that again. Keep your mouth shut. Don't share your opinions. Don't speak up. Yes, I know. And I get goosebumps too thinking about this. And I think about some of the experiences I had growing up where sometimes I can pinpoint that voice right there went some way in shaping my inner critic. And usually the voice is shaped by really key people in our lives who didn't necessarily mean to intentionally create an inner critic at us, like our parents or our coaches or teachers or key people around us that gave us messages about what we needed to do or be like in order to be okay and loved and accepted and to belong. So it's so important to remember that about your inner critic, to start releasing its grip on you as some kind of inner enemy. Because yes, its communication style is toxic as hell. Like it really needs to work on this. But its intention is good. Its heart is in the right place. It's trying to protect you. But the key thing to remember is that although it sounds super loud sometimes, and it sounds like the only voice available to you, there is always another part of you that is there to listen to and take guidance from. And that part is what I call the inner coach. This is the bit of us that's way more supportive and encouraging. So rather than being critical, it's compassionate. Rather than focusing on all our flaws, it will highlight and remind us of our strengths. Rather than focusing on trying to get everything perfectly so that people will accept us, it focuses on just, hey, why don't we just focus on learning and growing and just enjoying the process of progress? So it's that voice that some people say to me, Bex, I truly don't think I have an inner coach. Like I find it really hard to get into a more positive space with myself. All I can hear is negative stuff. And what I would say to people that say that to me is think about how you talk to other people that you love and care about. And if they are distressed, or if they are trying to learn something new, if they're outside their comfort zone and feeling a bit uncomfortable about it, what would you say to them? And we're so good. We can answer instantly. Oh, I'd say this, and I'd let them know it's okay to make mistakes and to fumble a bit. And so I would say, cool, you've got an inner coach that you use on other people. So now just do a U-turn and turn it in on yourself and talk to yourself in that way. Because as we'll probably unpack, the self-talk is very powerful and very important for being able to be the best human being we want to be, or the best leader, or fill in the blanks. So that's essentially the difference. Whereas the critic focuses on things that will keep us stuck in inaction, indecision, holding back. The coach allows us to move forward, and it will remind us of our values and what's really important to us, so that we can make decisions from that values-based place rather than the fear-based place that we'll think and act from when we're listening to the guidance of the inner critic.
And such powerful definitions. And yeah, like I got goosebumps and I almost got a little teary because I've got a 2.5-year-old and I am constantly, oh my gosh, am I setting up to fail? Because I understand how the mindset works. I'm like, oh my God, like what kind of mindset am I helping him to develop? And that's when I need to come back to my inner coach and hold compassion to me. Because while I'm trying to parent him, I'm also trying to re-parent myself and re-parent all of the conditioning that was put on me growing up and I'm trying to now process that, because the conditioning is so deep that it just comes out. And as you were saying about the inner coach being more compassionate, being kind, being supportive, being encouraging, it is a practice. And I would say actually we're innately born, I think, with the inner coach, with that love, that care, that compassion, that lack of embarrassment, that lack of worry, that lack of fear. If you look at kids, if you look at babies, they're so trusting. If we were inherently built with the inner critic, no one would learn to walk, because the amount of times you have to fall over in order to learn how to walk, we would have stopped. Be like, this isn't for me. I'm done. I suck at this. But it's, as you were saying, it's parenting, schooling. I think schooling has a really big impact on that inner critic being developed, the comparison against other kids and needing to perform and all of that stuff. But yeah, it's so true that we have both. And I really love the prompt that you give the people you work with. What would you say? Because if you have the words to say it to someone else, it means that you have the voice. And I really love that practice of, okay, just putting up that mirror and speaking it to yourself. And it is a practice, because let's face it, the world isn't conducive to lots of inner coaching. It's conducive to a lot of inner criticism.
Yes. And I think that's so important to remember in terms of giving ourselves grace as to why that inner voice can be so cruel sometimes. Look, none of us exist in a vacuum. We're being conditioned, like you say, by a society that does expect perfection, that does reward perfection. It rewards people that grind themselves into the ground with hustle culture and the expectations that, especially for any parents listening, that we just flawlessly juggle both our professional life and our personal life. So there's, whether it's explicitly said or not, there's subtle messages that we're always absorbing that absolutely feed the inner critic. If we are the only woman sitting around a board table with a bunch of men, of course we're going to feel like an imposter, because there's almost like a subtle message there that, like, do you actually belong here? So it's so important to be aware of the forces that shape that voice and to forgive ourselves for having that voice in the first place.
Oh, this is such a big work on for me. So this episode is it's so good. I'm going to listen to it when it's released as well. But you've talked a little bit about what some of the signals are already. So what are some of the signs that we're maybe more guided by our inner critic? But I just want to get a little bit more practical and crystal clear on really identifying when we're getting stuck or when we're getting caught in that inner critic cycle, and so that people starting to create like their own little, I don't want to call them red flags, but their own like little flags of, oh, okay, this is maybe where I am. Because something for me that I talk about with a lot of clients, and I know this is probably what you talk about, is we can't change what we don't know. So a lot of people are probably listening and going, oh yeah, that's a little bit of me. And oh yeah, like when I put up my hand about procrastination, yeah, that's a little bit of me. But I think we need to get even more specific of when is the thought or when is the behavior actually showing up so that we can then start to shift towards the inner coach. So what would be some of those like really specific things that people can start to look for to identify some of those inner critic cycles?
Great question. I like to break this down just very simply by unpacking the cycle for yourself between what am I thinking and then what am I feeling and therefore what am I doing. So it's very simple. Just think, feel, do. And people can even track this, like almost just put some headings in a journal, think, feel, do, and then just observe yourself throughout the day and see what happens. When I say thinking, it's not always that we tune into our thoughts, right? Because we're really busy people. We've got a lot on the go. And so often our mind is just playing out unconsciously. Like we don't even realize what our thoughts are doing. And the way to access your thoughts is by listening to what the voice in your mind is saying. And the way to recognize if you are in a sort of inner critic voice or you're being led by your inner critic is to watch out first and foremost for really negative language. So it's like judgmental language that you would probably never use with anybody else. If somebody in your team made a mistake and you're their leader, I very much doubt that we would say, "Oh my God, how useless are you? You have no idea what you're doing. You shouldn't even be here." We just would not do it. But it turns out that we're pretty good at saying that type of stuff to ourselves. So the first thing is listen to the language you're using with yourself. Listen to what your self-talk is saying. And if it's of a negative flavor, you're probably in inner critic mode. Also listen to the exact words of your self-talk. So what the inner critic likes to use is very extreme, rigid, black and white language. So it will say things to you like, you will never be any good at this. You always screw this up. So see how there's no room for nuance. It's just like a black and white blanket judgment that this one mistake means that you are a complete and utter fail and will never be any good at this thing. So that's another good thing to watch out for. So that's around the thinking part of the cycle, which then maps onto how we feel. So our thoughts map onto emotions and how we're feeling. So what you will notice when you're in a critic mode is emotions like fear and anxiety. A lot of we'll get stuck in sort of phrasal about all the what ifs. We'll start catastrophizing about what if this presentation goes wrong? What will people think of me? And you'll notice anxiety in your body, which might feel like a sped up heart rate. It might feel like heaviness in your chest. Sometimes I even almost feel like a clutch in my throat. It's almost a suffocating feeling. Our stomach will feel uncomfortable, probably lots of butterflies, maybe an upset stomach. So that's sort of feelings of anxiety. Shame is another really common emotion of the inner critic. Make a mistake and we almost hope that the floor is going to open up and swallow us because we just want to disappear. It feels so awful just to either have mucked something up or to feel like we've disappointed somebody.
We over-personalize it, right? That's the shame piece.
Yes.
Is I made a mistake to I am the mistake. Like I
That's
am
right.
and that.
Yeah. So we don't separate the behavior from the person. Exactly. I made a mistake versus I am some kind of mistake. And so those are common emotions. And then together, those sort of thoughts and feelings can push us into some common behaviors. And we've touched on some of these already. Everybody keep an eye out for things like procrastination. That is not about you being lazy at all. That is about the inner critic probably sparking anxiety because it's expecting you to be perfect and to have it all figured out. And that pressure feels so overwhelming that we put the task off. You'll notice that you are possibly overworking and over-preparing. So you might be the person that arrives first into the office every morning and you're the one to leave last. You're the one that's missing your lunch breaks because your inner critic is saying you need to be working harder. You got to prove yourself. You got to make sure this is right. You must get through this to-do list. You can't relax until you've finished all of the things, which let's face it, never happens. So we never relax and then we burn out and exhausted. You might also notice that you are doing that sort of pulling back and flying under the radar. So there could be people reaching out to you saying, hey, have you thought about this opportunity? And part of you is saying, I really should do that. That would be really good. But the dominant part, the inner critic, is saying, oh no, who are you to do that? What if you put your hand up for that and it goes wrong? What will people say? What will people think? No way. Go back to the comfort zone. We are not doing that. Well, all I would suggest is that people just unpack that little cycle for themselves and really bring awareness to when it's loudest or strongest, shall we say. In what context would you expect that cycle would kick off really quickly? It might be when you've started a new job. It might be when you've just got a promotion. These are all really right times for the inner critic to have a party because we're outside our comfort zone. We're wanting to make a good impression. We might be around people whose opinions we value. So we want them to like us and think that we're doing a good job. Get a really good steer for yourself on when it's going to happen, because when we're aware, we're more prepared to respond consciously and not just get carried away in the cycle and get hooked in our old defaults of maybe thinking negative stuff, feeling really emotionally uncomfortable, and then using our common coping behaviors to deal with it, like procrastination or perfecting and over-preparing.
I'm interrupting this episode to let you know that VIP Leaders, my leadership development program, is currently open for enrollment. VIP Leaders is my signature program that helps you strengthen your leadership identity, build trusted influence, and level up your emotional intelligence to become a leader people actually want to follow. The next round is starting very soon in June 2025. So if you are interested in leveling up your leadership skills, giving you everything that you need to be a leader people actually want to follow, head down into the show notes and click VIP Leaders to find out more. And if you've got questions, reach out and let me know. All right, let's head back to the episode. Oh, I love that. And it's such a powerful, simple way to think about it, because it's true. It's thoughts, feelings, actions, and it is just that perpetual cycle. But I really love that you specifically spoke to what situations do you believe that this happens for? Because I think that's a really key part. Because when you think about starting to build the awareness, people are like, oh my gosh, I need to pay attention to everything. We have 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day. So mate, you're not going to be paying attention to every one of those. But there are going to be very specific situations where you're paralyzed more often, or some of that inadequacy feelings or thoughts start to come up. And so, yeah, just even starting with some of those. But I also really love what you talked about around where is it most common? New job, promotion, going into a new environment with new people that you don't know, or maybe needing to step up in a current environment. And this is something that I talk about a lot when I do work around imposter thinking. I don't call it a syndrome because I don't believe it is. It's just a pattern of thinking.
Thank you.
I just dislike that it's called a syndrome. It's just a pattern of thoughts that we get stuck in. But one thing that I talk about a lot with imposter thinking is there are instances where it actually makes sense that you feel that way. Like when you start a new job that you've never done before, it makes sense to feel like an imposter in that moment because you have never done it before. You don't know how to navigate this, but that is the point of you being there, to learn how to navigate it, learning how to move through it. And so that kind of comes back to that compassion and grace piece, or even just that permission piece of, hey, it actually makes sense that I just have no idea what I'm doing, and that's okay. When I started school, I had no idea what I was doing. When I started my university degree, I had no idea what I was doing, but I figured it out. And that permission can just be so helpful to kind of give the inner critic, like I actually call my inner critic Deborah. That's her name. Her name's Debs. And when she starts piping up, I'm like, Debs, I get it. I got it. I know why you're a bit uncomfortable, but we've done lots of uncomfortable things before and we're here. Like we made it to this point. We can do this uncomfortable thing. And just like recognizing, like when I send a new pitch for something that's quite stretchy, I'm like, it makes sense that I don't want to do it. It makes sense that I'm procrastinating because this is new in this context. Yes, I've sent proposals before, but it hasn't been like this one. And I think that can just be an additional grace piece for people. It's, mate, you're just not going to have done everything. Otherwise, what's the point of living? What's the point? What are we doing here if we're not uncomfortable, right?
It's so true. And that's one of the major things that really tripped me up at uni, because I just would look around and I got horrendously caught up in comparisonitis, which of course is another impact of the inner critic. when we look at others and think they know what they're doing, they've got it sorted, it's easy for them, why is it so hard for me? And that's what really tripped me up at uni, because I had this assumption that I should know how to do everything. That when I started out writing my thesis or doing research, that I should know the answers already, when actually, like you say, that's the bloody point of being there, to research the answers, because no one knows them yet. So it's the attributions that we're making. Is it something about me, or is it inherent to the context that, of course, if I can't see myself represented somewhere, for example, like around the board table, of course I'm going to feel a bit strange and question whether I belong here, because I can't see another woman here, for example. It's so true that it's part of the awareness piece is what is happening in this particular context. How could the context be triggering these thoughts, feelings, and actions for me? It's not just all on you as the individual and our individual level conditioning. You can't really disentangle that from the context.
Absolutely. And I think this also is perpetuated within the time that we're living in. Like when we were younger, we didn't have social media the way that we do now. So you only compared yourself at school because that's where you saw people. But when you went home, you weren't seeing what Sally and Susan and Deborah are all doing at home and seeing what they're up to on the weekends on social media. Like you're not seeing any of that. So we had a lot more time, I think, to ground ourselves, depending on your home life and everything, of course. But now that kind of the stage that we're living in now, it's everything is visible. If people make things visible, it's what you can see, but it's also curated, right? And that's where the comparisonitis can be so toxic, because you're seeing people get promotions, you're seeing people do really great at their jobs, you're seeing people's businesses blowing up, you're seeing people making all this money, you're seeing these holidays and these lifestyles. But again, that's all curated. And so the inner critic, again, is only going to take surface level and base it on past experience, right? It's only going to filter consistently through that. And that's where we need the inner coach to be like, okay, how do we ask some of those deeper questions to really understand how to move through? And I think this is a good segue into how do we start building up our inner coach? How do we start building up that practice of strengthening our inner coach, talking to them, getting their voice to be louder and starting to quieten down inner critic? Because as we talked about before we hit record, I don't believe in getting rid of it because, as you said, it's important. It's there to keep us safe. It's there to help us survive. So we're not trying to get rid of it, but we're trying to befriend it, right? We're trying to make it an ally in us, like moving through our life. So what are 3 to 4 simple, practical things we'll start with listeners, so just individuals can do to start increasing their inner coach voice, the inner coach self?
I think that the first thing is actually related to the inner critic still, which, like we were talking about before, you can't change what you're unaware of. So the very first step of getting to your inner coach is actually recognizing when you're standing in inner critic space first. So it's noticing those times when you might be, in the signs and signals we talked about earlier. Notice, first of all, when you're like, oh, okay, right, Bex, right now you are standing in the inner critic space. You're listening to your inner critic. Listen out for that negative language. Be really observant in those contexts that you know it's most likely to be triggered for you, and just notice it. Like you say, the goal here is never to delete or get rid of the inner critic, because I promise you, everybody, I have tried every damn thing I could possibly try to find the delete button in my brain for the inner critic, because it's just caused so many issues for me in the past. And then I realized, oh, okay, there is no delete button. So exactly like you say, the only other option is to accept its presence and maybe even befriend it, let it be there, give it space to express itself, understand that it just goes with the territory, especially when we're driven, ambitious people that are often outside our comfort zone. It's going to turn up to protect you. It just is what it is. So notice it, say hello to it. I love that you befriended it, Tash. That's a really powerful thing to do. Give it a name. The more humorous, the better. Mine's called Ruth because she's ruthless. And it just helps to take the sting out of it a little bit. And then once we've done that, it's quite interesting. Once you've acknowledged your inner critic and you've said, oh, g'day, yeah, hi, thanks for showing up again to protect me. I understand why you're here. but I don't really have time today to talk with you any further. I've got stuff to do and you're getting in the way. Once we acknowledge it, we actually have mental and emotional space to switch our attention somewhere else, which is, what would my inner coach say right now? I know what my inner critic's saying, but what would my inner coach say? And the easiest way to tap into that is, what would I say to somebody else that was in this situation? Whether it was a team member that I lead, whether it was somebody I love, if they were doubting themselves, if they were anxious about something, if they were not sure how to start a big new project, what advice would I give them? What words of encouragement would I give them? What tone would I deliver it in? It would probably be a warm, caring, positive tone. What strength about them would I remind them of that are going to equip them to be able to do this task well, or to meet this challenge with resilience? So it really is, it's so much easier to think about what kind and supportive, empowering things we would say to somebody else, and think of it that way rather than, oh, how can I hype myself up? Just think of what you'd say to somebody else and say it to yourself. And honestly, I would just encourage everybody, don't just take our word for this. Actually do it and notice the impact that it has, because it does have an impact. It's actually incredible what happens when you actually start just being a little more kind to yourself and just catching yourself in those moments when you're actually beating yourself up. And even if you just, in those moments, put a sort of gentle hand to your chest, like a bit of comforting. I talk about self-soothing touch, which is actually a lot of science behind it about how powerful that is. Just calming our nervous system when we're in that frazzled, oh my gosh, not good enough state. And just saying stuff to you like, Bex, it's okay. This is tough, but you've done hard things before. We'll figure this out too. You don't, even though it feels like you need to do everything perfectly, what if we just focus on just taking the next step and seeing what happens, and then just experiment and see what happens and reevaluate? So exactly the stuff we would say to somebody else. The other thing I would recommend is, the inner critic can be so loud and powerful because it jumps on our inbuilt negativity bias that we have in our brain, which is to constantly be scanning for threat and negatives. So not only in our environment, because it's a survival mechanism to keep us alive, but we also turn that on ourselves. We're really quick to spot the negatives about ourselves. We fixate on them. We over-remember them. We can pull them, to the front of our mind really quickly. I always say to people, what's the one thing that will keep you awake at night? Is it the 100 bits of good feedback that you got on your work, or the one piece of constructive feedback? 3 a.m. in the morning, it's the negative stuff that we're going to think about and ruminate about. So what's really important, again, to tap into that inner coach type of relationship with ourselves and practice strengthening our inner coach, is to actually intentionally and purposely focus your attention on what is going right, what's going well. So whereas the inner critic will say, all of this is going wrong, here's where you screwed it up, here's where you're falling short, the inner coach would say, hang on a minute, maybe I did make some mistakes, but there's also all these other things that are going right, and they're important to acknowledge and celebrate too. Or whereas the inner critic will tell you what you're not and how not good as other people you are at certain things, the inner coach would say, actually, what's unique about me? What do I bring to the table that other people don't? And not just based on performance or skills or technical skills, but what about my life experience? What about my heart and how much I care about people genuinely? So it's a lot more nuanced and flexible and balanced. It's not that rigid black and white stuff. It's sure there might be some areas I need to grow, but I'm also doing really well in these places. And so I suggest to people, if it resonates with you, to start what I call a hype file. People have various names for this. It might be like,
I have a Windstar.
Yeah, the Windstar. Awesome. With colourful rainbow paper in it. Yes. But we do have to create the habit of practicing focusing on this stuff, because if we leave our mind to its own devices, it will not. It might for 10 seconds think, oh, good job, me, cool. And then we're moving on and then fixating on the flaws the rest of the time. So It is an exercise in brain training. And the more practice we get at it, the more automatic it becomes. And the stronger, literally, the stronger the neural pathways are in your brain that say, hey, I'm actually going to take a moment to spot some positives here. So we can lay that pathway down alongside the pathway of the negativity bias of the inner critic. But we're going to put the work in. We actually have to practice it.
Yeah, I love those, especially the last one. I think that's so important, which is why I talk about the wins jar so much because it's physical. I can see it on my desk. But when Debs pops up, you can't do this, or like you made this mistake, or oh, look, you got to know on that. Yeah, but I did all those things and I put all the proud moments, I put all the things, the results, the achievements, but also when I've overcome something really challenging, I take that as a win. And I think we don't recognize that enough as well. And there's the concept of the gap versus the gain. Like we're constantly focusing on the gap, the what I don't have yet, what I haven't done yet, how far I haven't gotten yet, all of those things. But we're not focusing enough on the gains. What's gotten me here? Like I've done a lot of things to get me to this point. And what are all the things that I'm working through right now? And yeah, I really love all of those. They're super, super practical. And I also really love the soothing, like the self-soothing one of just grounding yourself. For a lot of people who struggle with anxiety, it's what are the five, connect your five senses, right? Like touch, feel, smell, taste. You just ground yourself into something. And I see that with my son as well when he's really dysregulated. Sometimes it's leaving him to just express out his emotions, but other times it's a cuddle and that connection releases that oxytocin, that serotonin, all of those things, which then helps to settle the body back, which then gives us that clear mind to shift to the inner coach.
Yes.
And for me, just as an additional one, I think the other thing that I would say is like a practical, simple step is look after your whole being. Because I find personally my inner critic is louder when I'm not well, when I'm tired. You talked about being stressed and anxiety, but when I'm tired, when I'm unwell, for women, when I'm on my period, we're at our lowest energy point of our cycle. I don't have the energy to fight my brain. Like I don't have the
Yeah.
energy to like do that. And also like when you notice your inner critic being really loud, like, what else, like how do you actually feel physically, mentally, emotionally? And I know you talked about that think, feel, act, but just from a well-being perspective, like how well are you? Because it is easier for us to coach when we have the capacity to coach, when we have the capacity to use the energy in that way. And I think it's also another really important piece there.
Absolutely. Because you're so right. It does take self-regulation energy to be able to switch out from different mindsets. And what I would say too is please forgive yourself on the days when you just can't. I've had experiences recently, probably because I was tired too. And just times just the energy's weird around you. There's just something strange in the air and you're just not feeling at your best. And I swear to God, there was no way that my inner coach was happening on those days. I was convinced that what my inner critic was saying was true, and that's all there is to it. And this is when I know all of this stuff. I know every trick in the book, but it didn't do anything. So just because we know better doesn't always mean we will do better. And that is okay. That's part of this process and part of the journey of learning how to switch out of inner critic to inner coach mode. Some days it just won't be a happening thing, but that's part of the change process. It's not awesome. I guess we want to just hang out in a coach mode all the time, but it's a bit of a continuum. It's not a black and white, turn the light switch off thing. Like, I'm going to switch my critic off and I'm just going to hang out in a coach space. Not so much. So I think it's such a good point that the more you can look after yourself in general, the more you can get some good sleep, which I will wholeheartedly admit I am not awesome at. I'm working on that one. The better, the more able you will be to think more objectively, step out from those critical thoughts and see them for what they are, which is simply pictures and words moving through your mind that have been conditioned to be there. That's it.
Such an important part. And to round out as well, we are talking to a lot of managers and leaders who have the influence over other people, are in charge of other people. What would be 1 to 2 things managers, leaders can do if they see or notice someone in their team who maybe is overly self-critical or maybe is in that inner critic more? What could they do to better support them and help them shift to that inner coach?
Yeah. Same thing as what we do for ourselves to start with is bringing awareness to it, actually, because it's often quite a blind spot for people. We might not even know that we're being shoved around by our inner critic. So it might be saying something like, oh, I noticed you just mentioned you focused on all the mistakes you made in that presentation. That sounds like what I would call your inner critic talking there. That's fixating on that stuff, which is really normal. Leaders can do as much as they can to normalize stuff. It's really empowering and liberating to know that you're not the only one that gets caught in this stuff. I don't know how many times people have said to me, thank God. So I'm not crazy. I'm not abnormal. It's really comforting to know that. So normalize it for people that whenever we're doing anything a little bit scary or uncertain, it is normal to fixate on negatives, but then gently offer them another way of reframing. So I noticed your inner critic was saying XYZ, but rather than us focusing on the mistakes or what didn't go well, can we reframe that as what we just learned? What did we learn? Where
What
are
would
the
we do
opportunities?
differently?
What did we do differently? Exactly. Again, just bringing people's attention to it, bringing awareness to it, and then guiding them. So planting the inner coach seeds, or even asking questions like, what would you say to somebody else who just had that experience? If you were wanting to support and encourage them to move forward, what would you say? So it's actually guiding people to bring out their own inner coach rather than you just saying, oh, no, don't worry about it. It was a good job. Don't worry. That's fine. It's actually normalizing that it's not a comfortable experience when we're in self-critical mode, but we can choose how we respond to it. Do we get stuck there? Do we fixate on that? Or do we accept it and acknowledge its presence, but also choose to move forward with the learning and the growth that just came from mucking something up, for example? And another thing I think is important for leaders to do is just as much as you can, and in a genuine way, of course, highlight to people the value that they bring and the strengths that they have. And not just for perfect outcomes or perfect performance, but just general qualities of their, what I call you-ness. What is it about them that adds unique value to wherever they are and whatever they're doing? Because we're not that great at spotting that for ourselves. And I don't think we tell each other anywhere near enough the value that we're adding, just in ways that aren't just focused on how good we are at a job or what grade we got or how we did things perfectly. I think it's more just highlight what there is to celebrate about people just purely because of who they are and the energy that they bring when they walk into a room, for example. That makes a big difference to the world. That should be celebrated, that stuff.
Oh, I could not agree more. And I think that critical feedback or negative feedback, if we want to use that language, is harder to receive because people don't hear enough of what's working, what value
Yes.
they're adding, what strengths they're playing to. And so if you're consistently just hearing, oh, you could do this better, or you could do this differently, or it's okay, great, but what is working? Can you just tell me if what I'm doing is good enough? And I speak to leaders about that and they say, oh, but they know. They don't know, and that's your job. Feedback isn't only constructive. Giving praise is also a constructive piece of feedback because it's like, hey, I really loved what you did in that presentation. What you did here worked really well. I'd love to see more of that. That's constructive feedback because you're being specific about a piece of praise and telling them how they can use that more or asking them to use that more. And yeah, as much as individuals need to build their own self-validation, their own self-acknowledgement, as leaders, we also need to bring that into our culture. What are we acknowledging? What are we identifying that we want more of from our people, that we want more of in our teams? And that can also help to build up that inner coach as well. Because if people know what they're doing well and what's working and where they're adding value, they're in out feeling more purpose and connection and belonging, which in and of itself starts to quieten down that inner critic as well.
Totally agree. I think sometimes for those of us that have a much quieter inner coach, like we're just not practiced yet at tapping into it, I've certainly found myself, I've needed to borrow belief from other people sometimes just to bridge that gap between what they see in me, but what I don't yet see in me. So that has allowed me to take the steps to then grow into the belief that they have in me And if they hadn't shared that feedback to start with, I just would have held back and never would have made the steps because I didn't know that I had that potential until somebody else spotted it in me. So I think you're so right.
I love that borrow belief. I love that. BB, borrow some belief. That is amazing, Bex. As we wrap up, is there anything that you feel that you want to share that we haven't touched on?
Probably just for people to be excited about this journey and even excited about every time that your inner critic shows up. We can learn to see it as the enemy. Oh, no, not this voice again. I thought I was past this stuff. But every time it shows up, it is a call to action. It is your growth opportunity to say to yourself, here's my chance to choose a different way. We can't stop it showing up, but our power absolutely lives how we choose to respond to it every time it visits us. That's powerful stuff. And yes, our choice might look different on different days. For example, we were talking about if you're tired and you're really feeling quite consumed by it. No matter how successful we are at stepping into inner coach mode, there is always a choice. And I just think it's such a liberating, empowering thing to know that it's actually you that's the boss of your mind. You get to be the orchestrator of those different parts of yourself. You get to choose which one steps forward into the spotlight and actually leads you forward or pulls you back. And that's a cool thing because nothing is beyond us. If we know that we can choose, we'll handle it. Even if we fail at it, we'll handle that too. We can coach ourselves through tough moments, through challenges, through anything really. That's freedom. That's what I would call freedom.
I love that so much. My play on that is instead of trying to reach a goal of, oh, my inner critic's just not a problem anymore. My aim is always, can I shorten the time that I spend in inner critic? Because that means that I accept the inner critic's going to come up because that's just normal. But can I start reducing the time that I spend there, which means it comes up, I acknowledge it, and then I move through it maybe a little bit quicker than last time. Or maybe I don't spiral out of control for 2 days or whatever it might be. And that's what I count as it's like, oh, I spent less time here than the last time the situation came up. And that's a real win. It's not, I got rid of it. It's just, I spent less time here. And that's what I share with people. It's like, the win is actually the less time we're spending in these spirals, the less time we're spending in these blocks. That's the real win. It's not getting rid of the block or getting rid of it altogether. So yeah, I really love that. And I love that
That's
excitement.
very much an inner coach definition of success, isn't it?
It is. I always think about success as what's within my control. It's within my control of how much time I reduce spending in this. It's not in my control for it not to come up because I'm not consistently in control of my brain. We think we are, but we're not. And yeah, it is. I always try and define success as what are the inputs versus what are the outputs, because that's the only thing you can control. Oh, amazing, Bex. This is such an amazing conversation. And I do have some staple questions to finish off with, some quick fire ones. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received that's helped you be a better leader?
I would say be yourself. Be yourself and just genuinely care about people. That goes a really long way. And what I love with the inner critic work is that when we have tools to manage its impact, to reduce the amount of time we spend in its negative impact, it enables us to be ourselves and fully and authentically connect with people because we are being ourselves. And there's not a sort of wall in between us and other people because we're all up in our head fretting about whether we're doing a good enough job. So we can actually be present with people and we can care genuinely about people when we're just there to be of service, not to worry about whether the way that we are being of service is good enough or not.
Yeah, I love that. What is one thing that helps you feel courageous to do scary things?
Always reflecting on my why. So why am I here in the first place? Why do I care about doing this scary thing? And for me, typically, the most powerful one is for my son, is what do I want to role model to him? What sort of values do I want to be his norm? What do I want him thinking about when I'm long gone and he reflects on what mum taught him and what she role modeled to him? What do I want that to be? And I can be guaranteed that it will pull me out of an inner critic slump a lot of the time and be courageous.
Yeah, I love that. It's beautiful. And what's one boundary that you uphold that supports you to be your best?
non-negotiable, must move my body somehow every day. I just am at my best when I have done some type of physical movement every day. And it's something I've learned not to apologize for, because it actually enables me to be of greater service to others when I'm protecting time for that. My mental health is better. I'm a better parent, and I'm much better at my job when I've had that time to switch off my brain and just get grounded in my body. So it's a very strict boundary around that. And again, I've learned to make no apologies about it.
We have too much martyrdom conditioning in a society, especially women. The more that we can be unapologetic about the things that we need in order to be our best, the better. The better humanity is, because when we're full, we give fullness, and then relationships just get better and better, right? Because we interact better, we have more compassion, all of those things. So good to uphold that boundary. Oh, Bex, this was such an amazing conversation. I feel like there's some other things that we could potentially jump into. So, we might need to talk further, but where can people connect with you and find you so that we can also put that in the show notes?
I am on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I have a book called Inner Critic to Inner Coach, which is specifically focused more on this sort of imposter thinking flavored type of inner critic. We very helpfully are going to avoid that word syndrome, as we talked about earlier. And just on my website, so remixcoaching.co.nz, I would love to hear from anybody who wants to reach out with insights, with questions. I really mean that. I love hearing from people. And also wins. If there are any wins you'd love to share, if you practice this stuff, you give it a go, you give it a whirl, hanging out, relating to yourself in more of an inner coach type way, let us know. Reach out and tell us what the impact of that was for you. That would be so cool to hear.
Absolutely. You stole that closing line for me. So if you do have feedback, insights, takeaways, please let us know. You can reach us both on our websites, LinkedIn, email, Instagram, all of the places. We're there. So thank you again, Bex. It was such an amazing conversation. And thank you, listeners. And we hope that you took a lot out of this episode. And I'll be back in your ears again next week. Hey, that's all from me today. Thank you so much for listening to Lead With Less. It means the world to me if you could take a moment to leave a rating and a review on Apple, or just rate with 5 stars on Spotify. It means a lot to the growth and the expansion of the podcast. And if you know any other people leaders who could do with a dose of inspiration to level up their leadership skills, then please forward on this podcast to them. I would really appreciate it. And as always, if you have any feedback or have any thoughts, please message me on LinkedIn, Instagram, or email. I'd love to hear from you.